Okay, so Ken, I've been running these conferences. This is the fourth year now, and we've had many discourses, debates around what is creativity, and everyone has a very different approach. And from seeing your LinkedIn profile, I see that you've written several books on creativity, and it seems as though you are focused on the cognitive aspect of creativity, how we think about creativity, whereas others, tend to focus on the biological aspect. What is it in our brains, and what makes one person more creative than another from the biological aspect, and others have a social view on creativity. So let's start with your approach then. So if you could just introduce I know you can't summarize 3 books in a very short space of time, but just very briefly, what is your approach to creativity?
Well, I guess I like to think about creativity as a skill. So, and the more we, and if you think about it as a skill, as a thinking skill, basically, then like any skill, the more that, you practice and develop it, the better that you can become at it. I also think, like any skill, there are some people that are, better at it than others. But we all have this kind of capacity for, creative thinking. And so that's been kind of my focus as something that I've enjoyed and probably has come kind of naturally to me. When I was in corporate life, I was intrigued by the idea that people would, so many people would struggle with it. And so, when I left corporate life, I did a research degree and then spent my time working with people to try and to develop their creative thinking skills.
Okay. And this year we're focusing on presence, emergence, and impact. So for some people, presence is also a skill, the skill of being alert and being aware of what's going on around us. Do you see presence as a skill?
Absolutely. And I would kind of use probably different terminology, but I think we're talking about the same thing. I think just being, alert, noticing, I think is really important. For example, I've done work with corporate clients, and I developed a concept called small wins innovation. It was just the idea that innovation didn't have to always be big and disruptive. It could be, small and tiny and could still make a difference. And I would encourage them, once we kind of talked about it, that they would actually go on a sort of idea safari and actually go and look at Starbucks or a McDonald's or an Adidas and actually look at the tiny things that they were doing that were always there, but they just hadn't noticed them. And then when they brought them back, then they could chat about them and see how they might apply to their organisation.
Right. And very often it requires being in the moment to be able to notice these things. Many of us, if we're not in that state of alertness, we miss so many opportunities. We miss so many possibilities, don't we?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think the other part of that would be also being open to it. So I think they're all interconnected and interrelated. So, you've got to be present, got to be noticed, you've got to be open to it, and have a sense of, humility about, the idea that other people have ideas and there's ideas all around you. It's, if you're, have a touch of humility, you can see them and sense them and potentially access them.
And then going on to emergence, then very often when we are, emergence is the unexpected, the unforeseen, the unplanned, and very often we're too focused on looking for what we are expecting that we miss what is not expected.
Yeah, that's a lovely insight. I think that's exactly right. I think that, if you think about it as more of a, the sort of a journey rather than a destination, I think that's it's a good way of thinking about it. The idea of, I was out kind of looking for, in a corporate sense, for a a customer service idea. And in that sort of journey, I came across all these other amazing ideas, which may or may not have anything to do with, a customer service. It could be a new product or, a way of dealing with staff, for example. But I think emergence is a lovely idea. One of my co-supervisors was a chaos mathematician, and there's this beautiful idea that creativity lives at the edge of chaos, and this idea that and in that space and in that place, that's when new ideas, out of those interactions, new ideas emerge. And I've always thought that's been that was a kind of a lovely concept. And when I would talk to leaders in organisations, for example, about what a creative organisation might look like, or a creative culture, they might talk about, whilst they didn't use this language, they would talk about, the unexpected, the surprising, where the interactions around in the coffee room, and waiting in lines to get lunch, for example.
Yes, the synchronicity, the serendipity, the chance, the accidental encounters, the clash of mind sometimes.
No, exactly right. And it's in fact, I spent a day with I did a case study on the ABC in Australia, not your equivalent to the BBC, and I spent a couple of days just in watching people interact in when they were having lunch, because they had at this stage their own internal cafeteria. And just watching people bumping into other and, mixing and saying, oh, that reminds me, John, can you do this? And the leaders would talk about it almost like, one, it was so important, but two, it was kind of, I coined it as sort of a shadow system. There was a sort of formal system and this informal system that and often I felt that the informal system was as important, if not more, than the sort of kind of formal innovation process that a lot of organizations followed.
Right. Yeah. And then during this pandemic, there's been a lot of emergence of new ideas, new opportunities, new innovations. And from your experience, what have you noticed to be the impact of all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think things like I've noticed when I would talk to sort of friends and colleagues and clients, things like they're genuinely surprised at what they can achieve in a short period of time. And the idea of a greater level of trust amongst team members. One leader I spoke to just said, look, I'm not there physically, and I've had to change my leadership style to engender more kind of trust. And I think kind of paradoxically, that's created a kind of sometimes a safer working space. In my doctoral research, I talked about the idea that, people can be creative, can take risks, paradoxically, only if they feel safe. And, it's, I use I can go out exploring and hunting and gathering, but only if I've got a safe cave to go back to. And I felt that the COVID virus and the way we're all adapting is, in a sense, we're kind of all in it together. It feels like, we're all discovering new things. We're all this new stuff is emerging, from, less formal structures around, doing what we're doing now, Zoom meetings, and accessing a greater number of people through technology. And so I think there's a sense of it's become less formal, perhaps more productive, and sometimes more creative, I think.
And you talk about safety and confidence go hand in hand. And what I've noticed is that you have to be very confident sometimes to be publicly creative. People can be creative in a personal space, but to share that creativity in a public space, there needs to be the confidence. And as you say, that safety goes, is relevant as well, that we need to feel that that the risk that we're taking, that there is a safety net, as it were. So again, that's related to presence, so do you feel that when we are present with more confidence and more, a feeling of greater security, that we're able to be more creative?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you touched upon a really important point of the kind of, it's always been the case, but I think more so now and in the future, the ongoing role of leaders is not just to be, an old leadership model was, I'll do all the thinking and you do all the doing, whereas now it's much more a shared collaborative experience. And the idea of leaders encouraging their teammates and giving people permission to, express their ideas and to challenge, the prevailing mindset. And I think that that's a really important point. I think the other thing too is you have to be confident in front of others, but I also think there's another dimension of confidence, which is you've got to be confident in your own creativity. And because one of the biggest barriers that I was run into in the sort of the corporate world, if you like, and in profit organizations that I work with, is people just saying, I'm not creative, and it's such a fundamental and huge barrier. I developed a concept which I called speed thinking. And it was based on an insight that a lot of people do their best work paradoxically when they don't have much time to do, and it's partly because they don't overthink, analyze, and judge and filter their responses. They just get things out. But I called it speed thinking. And when people say that I'm not very good with creative thinking, I'd say, but this is speed thinking. They go, oh, okay, I can do it. And so kind of language also plays a part in it as well.
And what you call speed thinking, is that allowing the unconscious mind to, like allowing this emergence of thought from the unconscious mind? Is that what it is?
Yes, no, exactly right. And it was based on this insight, and you would have been, been a participant and probably led, I guess. But when you get a bunch of people together and they meet for an hour around a problem. And when I was facilitating groups, for example, I noticed that not much happened until sort of the last 10 minutes. And I opened the door and said 10 minutes to go. And there was this huge kind of burst of energy. And all these new ideas, just emerged. And then people would go, oh my God, this was, look what's happening. There's energy and drama and theatre and a deadline. And I think it was because, certainly because there was a deadline, but I think because they kind of let go, if you like, of the kind of rational controlling mind and allowed their unconscious to kind of, to express itself. And then they'd come back. The other interesting thing with corporate leaders is then they would kind of go through this kind of almost a funny ritual of presenting their ideas in a logical, rational, analytical way. And, I knew 3 minutes ago that they had nothing. So it didn't come from that process.
Right. So they were evaluating their ideas. Is that what they were doing by presenting them in a logical fashion?
Yes. Well, I think that's part of it. And the other thing that was part of it was because it was almost like they didn't trust themselves or didn't trust their unconscious to say, here is a great idea. They almost had to, I called it in my research, they had to dress up the idea in kind of rational clothes, to be kind of almost taken, seriously, because they almost had to, suggest to people they went through a kind of a serious process when, this serious, rational, logical process, when in fact they kind of bypassed that process and stuff emerged from their unconscious, and it was amazing, and they were completely energized by it. But back to my also earlier point is the idea of trusting themselves, trusting themselves that they could, they were more creative than they gave themselves credit for.
And
Excuse me.
that some of it has to do with the definition of creativity, because a lot of people, I find that when they say, I'm not creative, what they're really saying is that I can't draw. What they're saying is I can't paint, or I
Yes.
can't write non-fiction literature. You know, that's what they mean by creativity. And when we look at creativity in a broader context of that, well, creativity is also when we share ideas and
Yeah.
we synthesize ideas. That's creativity. We make connections, we see patterns that weren't visible, you know, without the synthesis, as it were. So, but something interesting that you said about emergence of like thought from our unconscious, and the need for people to rationalize, to evaluate, to present it in a logical form. You see, our unconscious mind is full of both positive and negative, though. You know, there's all sorts of fears and anxieties, and you know, the unethical things that might be I don't know, driving us in our unconscious. And so how do we, you know, so what I'm saying is that emergence is not always positive, it's not always beneficial. So how do we filter out, how do we discern whether it's creativity that is going to be beneficial and create a positive impact, and whether it's something that could be destructive? You know, because some people could argue that creativity can sometimes be destructive as well.
No, it's a great insight. I think that that's a real issue, because you know there's a whole bunch of stuff in the in the kind of sporting literature, for example, around you know, and when I play golf, for example, and the course that I play, there's a particular hole which I've always had trouble with, and you know, there's water on the left-hand side, and my unconscious mind, even before I step up to it, goes, "Don't hit it left, don't hit it in the water," and of course, you know, it's, you know, that's where it invariably goes, which kind of reinforces my voice in my head, the negative voice. One thing I found with speed thinking, which it was people found helpful, was the idea of, I gave people a time limit. So the first start of, it's a 5-step process, but the first step is just to start. And I literally say, look, all you have to do is start, you know, and you have to start by creating 9 ideas in 2 minutes. They don't have to be, you know, forget the idea of good or bad ideas. Your goal, your only goal, is to get to 9 ideas to meet this challenge in 2 minutes. And that actually seems to work. There's something about the time limit which gives a bit of urgency. They don't have time to overthink or overfilter their ideas. It creates a bit of kind of drama and a bit of slight competition with other people, bit of fun. And the other thing that happens, I think, is that it just, you know, they get past the 3 or 4 usual ideas, and by the time they get to 5, 6, and 7th ideas, it's starting to be a lot more original, a lot more unique ideas, and then they kind of get more confident and surprise themselves. So I think it is a real issue that, and that's kind of one way I've kind of, you know, get people just to do stuff quite quickly.
Right. And do you feel that if they are in a state of being relaxed, they are more likely to have ideas that are unique and novel compared with when they might be under stress and anxious?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think there's two. I think my experience has been in twofold. One is, I think we underestimate, and I wish I could bottle it, but the idea of kind of sleeping on a problem, you know, sleeping on a challenge, and just you know, I'm working on a new concept at the moment, and I've just got to a point where sometimes I'm just going, I'm blocked. I can't, you know, I'm just not moving forward, and then I go, all right, just let it go, and I sleep on it, and invariably I have something new in the morning, or I visualize something, or I kind of like to think in images or, you know, models, and then I quickly sketch it down. So I think that is a really, you know, important part of the process. The other thing with the speed thinking stuff, I kind of say it would be semi-relaxed. It's sort of what I found. Remember the old days, people would run brainstorming sessions, and you know, they'd have well, you know, brightly coloured walls, and you know, it was all kind of funky and it was all good. And then they'd have bean bags on the floor, and then they'd people would sink into the bean bags, and half an hour later, that, you know, half of them were asleep. I'm exaggerating, but they'd sort of got in such a relaxed state that, you know, they just they were kind of drifting off. So I think there's a way that you can introduce, you know, you've got to find that kind of edge of, you know, the kind of edge dynamic zone, if you like, where you kind of give people, you can get people to play and enjoy in a kind of flow-like state, but without being, you know, they're so relaxed, because they still have to have some sort of focus, I think, and goal.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Wallace's theory of the 4 stages of creativity, where I think it's 1923 he wrote the book about, I'm not sure if he called it the process of creativity, but
Right, yes.
Yeah, where incubation is a very important part, you know, so which, as you say, it's very often ignored. That creativity needs to have that incubation stage where we allow the unconscious mind to to work on that problem or the idea, and to then be able to emerge.
Yes,
Something which is of value.
I think that's a really good model, and the other aspect of that model in the incubation stage is also suggesting to people, when I've done workshops, is to say, you know what, when you've got to a point where you just, you know, here's you're in this sort of, you need to incubate, go and work on something else, you know, and or go for a walk or whatever. But even working on something else, your unconscious mind, I think, is still sort of, you know, beavering away at trying to solve this original problem, and often you make connections between what you're doing now and, you know, the previous challenge. And I've always thought that was not only creative but quite efficient, because sometimes you, and again, this is back to this confidence in yourself, to let go of the idea that I have to focus and I have to struggle, and sometimes I think you just kind of, you do that and you come to a point, you go, you know what, I'm just going to trust myself and let it go, and something new will emerge.
Mm. And one of the differences between the conscious mind and the unconscious is that the unconscious mind tends to not think in linear fashions. Yes. Creates connections, and it synthesizes rather than have logical responses. And then when those ideas emerge, then we do have that tendency to then try and make logical, rational sense.
Yes. No, I think that's right. And I think, you know, when we were talking about with, you know, with speed thinking, and people would create the ideas and then they would come back and present it. And I think that's also what they were doing as well, this sort of verification and, you know, but, you know, but what is interesting, that they kind of, not many people actually would almost admit to the idea of that, for a brief moment, that they, you know, their creative juices were flowing, and they were using anything other than logic. But that could be a small sample, because it tends to be kind of corporate leaders. But I think that's changing as well. And so there's a greater acceptance, I think, of just, you know, ideas can come from anywhere, you know, through any process, you know, at any time, that sort of idea.
And in the current situation, with this, you know, with the emergence of new ways of working, for one thing, and new ways of even interacting with our families, what do you see to be the impact of that, like in terms of our presence? Do you think that it will transform our presence in the long run, or do you think that we will go back to what we consider to be normal very quickly?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a bit of an unknown. My sense of it is that that it's kind of changed forever. I think the idea, I think what people go back to is some hybrid or combination of kind of, you know, trying to connect the old and the new. For example, managers and corporate leaders that I talk to will say, look, I just love working from home. I save travel time, and it's less formal, and I get more work done. But I'm missing the social aspects. I'm missing the social connections, the interactions, the spontaneous stuff. So I think in the future it'll be some model of at home, at the cafe, at the restaurant, at a kind of office scenario. I think there'll be some kind of hybrid model. But I think things like, a greater informality, a breaking down of structures, a growing sense of trust, I think they're all ongoing, and I think that they will continue. And all those, I think, add up to a kind of more creative and innovative kind of culture. And also just the idea that, what COVID's proved to everyone, it's at a terrible price, but the virus has proved to a lot of leaders of what's possible. Things that they never thought they could ever do is suddenly, they're doing it. And it's been driven because of necessity. But once you open once you open your mind to a new possibility, I find it hard to imagine that people would then go back to saying, no, we've got to do it in this kind of more structured way.
And I suppose the worrying thing is just those people who are not seeing those possibilities, those who are just waiting for things to get back to normal. Yes,
I think that is true, and I think that's a mistake. I think this idea of just kind of waiting for the normal to return. It's a bit like, silly example, but once I had two teenage daughters, and they introduced me to Apple products, for example. And once I kind of got the Apple experience, and I just went, oh, actually, this is what a phone could do, and this is what an iPad and what style and design and the user experience. Once I kind of got it, I just said, there's no way I'm actually going to go back to what the products that I was using before, and Uber and taxis, and there's lots of examples of Dyson, and once you experience the kind of Dyson, even just the look and feel, and imagine going back to an old-fashioned fan. It's just
that's what they say about creativity, that one of the criteria is that it leaves an indelible mark, that people will say that there is no going back from this now. We can't think of a world without Facebook now. We can't think of a world without Zoom.
Yes. No, I think that is true. And I think that we can also then, take it and improve it, make it better, because it also has downsides. But I do think that, I think you're right. Once you've kind of imagined it and you've experienced it, it's hard to, and particularly if it's a pleasant experience, you just go, oh, I'm just not going ever back to that, or how do we ever put up with that idea of kind of, I would travel. I live in Sydney in Australia, and I would regularly travel when I was setting up my business to Melbourne or Adelaide, other cities, for example, which was, and I'd spend it all day for a half an hour meeting. And now the idea of that now, I just think, and I'm older as well, but the idea of doing that, you think, well, that's just a silly idea.
And I suppose the younger generation, they, the so-called millennials, they want jobs that they can just do on their mobile phone sitting in a cafe. So maybe in a way, we're just catching up with them. The wave had already started, and the pandemic has just forced those of us who were not used to what the younger generation want. We weren't used to that. We've been forced to be radical in our lifestyles so that we catch up with what was emerging already.
No, I think that's a really good point, and your language was very important as well. What seemed a big leap for us, I've got a 21-year-old daughter. It just seemed like a small jump for her. She said, well, what and your problem is, and whereas, you know, for me, it was, I was just going, well, it's the whole idea of kind of, you know, because we'd also defined, you know, work as a physical place as well. You know, we go to a physical office as well, as opposed to, you know, if you switch the idea of just thinking about nouns to, and you switch to thinking about verbs, it opens up your thinking. So if you think about, instead of work, like a workplace, to working, well, you can work in as a verb, you can do that anywhere. And we've now got the technology, and we've had that for sort of 5 years. You know, now we can, suddenly our thinking is opened up.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ken. That's been a very, very interesting conversation with yourself. And is there anything else that you would just like to sum up with?
Oh no, I think that it's a great opportunity for you know, and you mentioned it before, for people that, you know, that there seems to be no, we have this enormous possibilities. You know, the idea of yesterday what seemed impossible today seems kind of, you know, possible. You know, and that switch from impossible to possible, I think, is so exciting. You know, and the idea of you know, like tackling the big issues like climate change, you know, gives me hope that we might one day actually be able to tackle it in a really meaningful, sustainable way.
Well, that was one of the positives that came out of the pandemic, that we saw that with just a couple of weeks of lockdown, nature seemed to restore its balance very, very quickly.
Yes, no, exactly right. And I think that's and also, I think a lot of people would say, you know, I talk to even things like their own kind of, there's downsides, but their own well-being. You know, I was exhausted all the time. I was always on planes. I had to travel here, or I had to, whereas now, you know, I was, had coffee the other day outside a cafe. And the couple next to me said, we love it because every morning now we get up together and we go for a walk. And where we would normally be in buses or trains or trams, or, you know, is now we actually walk and chat and talk, and we're outside, and you go, that's fantastic.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ken. I'll speak with you.
That's right, my pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.